Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat sejahtera. Ini adalah topik Accounting for Receivable atau Perakaunan akaun belum terima dengan subtopik Accounting Method for Bad Debt iaitu Allowance Method. Jika anda rasa ia bermanfaat, sila subscribe, like and share. Accounting Method for Bad Debt. There are two methods. Firstly, direct write-off method, and secondly, allowance method. While allowance method is divided into two, first is percentage on the balance of accounts receivable basis, and secondly is percentage on sales basis. Allowance method or provision method is an estimated uncollectible account becomes bad debt on the basis of percentage on the balance of accounts receivable and percentage of sales. Ini bermaksud allowance method adalah anggaran akaun yang tidak dapat dikutip menjadi hutang lapuk berdasarkan pertama, peratusan baki akaun belum terima dan yang kedua adalah peratusan jualan. Bad debt expenses is to be matched with doubtful debt accounts. Ini bermaksud pembelanjaan hutang lapuk disesuaikan dengan akaun hutang ragu berbanding disesuaikan dengan akaun receivable mengikut direct write-off method. Dan peruntukan hutang ragu ataupun allowance for doubtful debt adalah kontra dengan akaun belum terima dalam financial position. Recording bad debt expenses. Bagaimanakah kita hendak merekod bad debt expenses dalam allowance method? Okey, kita bandingkan dengan kaedah direct write-off method terlebih dahulu yang telah kita pelajari dalam video sebelum ini. Mengikut kaedah direct write-off method, kita debitkan bad debt expenses dan kita kreditkan accounts receivable. Manakala mengikut kaedah allowance method, kita debitkan bad debt expenses dan kita kreditkan allowance for doubtful debt. Pertama sekali, kita pergi kepada kaedah pertama dalam allowance method iaitu percentage on the balance of accounts receivable. Saya hendak pelajar mengingati formula ini iaitu percentage of allowance darab dengan closing balance of accounts receivable sama dengan closing balance of allowance for doubtful debt. Ini adalah step yang pertama. Berikut disenaraikan steps to calculate bad debt expenses mengikut allowance method dengan percentage on the balance of accounts receivable basis. First step is calculate closing balance of allowance for doubtful debt. Second step is draw T accounts for allowance for doubtful debt. Third step is fill in all the particulars or transaction in the T accounts. For example, balance brought forward and balance carry forward. And the fourth step is calculate the missing figure, that is the bad debt expenses. Example 1, percentage on the balance of accounts receivable method. Balance brought forward for allowance for doubtful debt is 500. balance carry forward for accounts receivable is 110,000 and estimated uncollectible debt is 1% of accounts receivable. So first of all, you have to calculate percentage of allowance times closing balance of accounts receivable equals to closing balance allowance for doubtful debt. The calculation is 1%, that is the percentage of allowance, times 110,000 equals to 1,100. 1,100 is closing balance allowance for doubtful debt, and this is the first step. So, adjustment is needed to get the amount of bad debt expenses. Just follow the steps that I've been given you before. First step is draw the accounts for allowance for doubtful debt. Then, fill in balance brought forward 500 that has been given, and then fill in balance carry forward that is 1,100 that we have just calculated before. After that, balance the accounts, that is 1,100 left and right, and then the missing figure is 600. This is bad debt expenses. So this is how we get bad debt expenses using this method. To record bad debt expenses in journal entry. On 31st December, debit bad debt expenses 600 and credit allowance for doubtful debt 600. Narration: to record bad debt expenses. Now we look at example 2, percentage on the balance of accounts receivable method. Balance brought forward allowance for doubtful debt is 1,500. Balance carry forward account receivable 110,000, and estimated uncollectible debt is 1% of accounts receivable. So first of all, we calculate the balance carry forward allowance for doubtful debt. 1% for percentage allowance, multiply with 110,000 for balance carry forward accounts receivable, and it equals to 1,100 balance carry forward allowance for doubtful debt. And this is the first step. Next step is to draw the account for allowance for doubtful debt. Then, fill in the balance brought forward, that is 1,500, and then fill in the balance carry forward, that is 1,100 that we have just calculated before, and then balance the account, that is 1,500 left and right, and then we can get the missing figure at the left side, that is 400. Because it is at the left side, so it is not the bad debt expenses. It is called decrease in allowance for doubtful debt. And the journal entry is on 31st December, debit allowance for doubtful debt 400 and credit decrease in allowance for doubtful debt 400. Di sini pelajar akan nampak perbezaan dalam merekod journal. The second basis in allowance method is percentage on credit sales, and it is divided into two. First is percentage on net credit sales basis. The calculation for bad debt expenses is percentage of allowance multiply with net credit sales equals to bad debt expenses. Di sini pelajar akan dapati bahawa calculation untuk bad debt expenses adalah terus daripada percentage of allowance didarabkan dengan net credit sales. The value of bad debt expenses is calculated using the above formula. And the net credit sales is the amount of total credit sales deduct sales discount and sales return. Ini bermaksud penjualan kredit bersih adalah jumlah keseluruhan penjualan kredit setelah dikurangkan dengan diskaun jualan dan pulangan jualan. Next example is balance brought forward for allowance for doubtful debt is 500, credit sales is 23,000, sales discount is 3,000, estimated that 2% from net credit sales is uncollectible. To calculate the bad debt expenses is percentage of allowance multiply with net credit sales equals to bad debt expenses. 2% multiply with 20,000. Bagaimanakah dia mendapat 20,000? Adalah net credit sales, iaitu credit sales 23,000 minus with sales discount 3,000. Then, pelajar akan terus dapat bad debt expenses iaitu RM400. Di sini, untuk kaedah ini, pelajar tidak perlu buka akaun T untuk allowance for doubtful debt. Untuk catatan jurnal contoh tadi adalah on 31st December, debit bad debt expenses 400 and credit allowance for doubtful debt 400. Narration to record bad debt expenses. Kenapa kita kreditkan allowance for doubtful debt? Kerana ini adalah kaedah allowance dan bukannya kaedah direct write-off. Next method on percentage on sales is percentage on credit sales basis. For example, balance brought forward allowance for doubtful debt is 500, credit sales is 23,000, sales discount 3,000, estimate that 2% from credit sales is uncollectible. So, the formula is percentage of allowance multiply with credit sales equals to bad debt expenses. And the calculation is 2% allowance multiply with 23,000. Kenapa kita ambil 23,000 tanpa menolak sales discount? kerana ini adalah kaedah on credit sales. Oleh itu, tidak perlu tolak sales discount ataupun sales return. And it equals to RM460. That is the bad debt expenses. Catatan jurnal untuk contoh tadi adalah on 31st December, debit bad debt expenses $460 and credit allowance for doubtful debt $460. Narration to record bad debt expenses. Dengan itu, video ini dan video sebelum ini telah cover method of bad debt dan video seterusnya akan cover bad debt write-off dan bad debt recovery. So, sila tunggu dan jangan lupa subscribe, like and share. Sekian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat sejahtera.